I'm a bow hunter and I like to still hunt, which is when you dress in full camo and walk through the woods rather than sit in a tree stand. Last October, I was coming down a hill into a marshy area, and it was kind of late, and enough so that the side of the mountain was covered in shadows at least. I live in PA, where our mountains are completely covered in trees, and it gets dark pretty fast out here. When I get to the bottom of the hill, I noticed that it was completely silent, no sounds at all, and I felt the hairs just stand on my arms. But I've been creeped at before in the woods, so it wasn't too big of a deal, so I kept on. I've been hunting in this general area before, but I've never went down this hill, so I continued creeping through the woods. Mind you, I'm walking pretty slow at this point, so you can barely hear my footsteps because deer are pretty hard to sneak up on. And then I hear a voice call out for me from behind a thicket of small trees. The voice says, "Help, come over here, please, I'm in trouble, help." And I swear to you that it was my brother's voice. But my brother lives in Nevada, so it couldn't have been my brother. And it even said my name. It only took me a second to realize that something just wasn't right, and when I did, I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Only my dad knew where I was hunting that day, and the area is huge, and no one would have found me there, and he's too old to have played any tricks on me, but something out there knew my name, and it sounded just like my brother. I don't know what the hell that was, but I don't think I'll ever be going back to those woods again. Maybe I'll move to the desert with my brother, where at least I can see everything around me. So I thought I'd share some experiences from my short time as the night watchman at a very, very old historic cemetery. I worked the 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. shift. The cemetery generally closed at 6 p.m, so around 5:30 p.m, I'd lock the main gate and then would start driving through the cemetery to notify any visitors that we'd be closing soon. I'd instruct them to park in a line in front of the locked main gate, and when my drive through the grounds was complete, I would unlock the main gate and everyone would leave, and then I would lock the gate behind them. So one day, I'm in the middle of the final drive-through, and I see an old lady slowly walking the sidewalk alongside a mausoleum. The mausoleum was hundreds of feet long, about 20 feet tall, and had no breaks in it. It was one long stretch, in other words. The road ran directly alongside the sidewalk of it, and so I pulled up behind the lady to tell her that we're closing, get out of my car, take my eyes off her for just a split second as I'm getting out of the car, and when I shut the door and look up, she's gone. Just completely vanished. I didn't think anything paranormal at first. I just thought that maybe I lost sight of her or something. But the sidewalk and the road were completely empty. I ran all the way around the back to check too, but no one was there. Across from here too was a whole field of graves, and my eagle eyed the crap out of every row, but there just wasn't a soul in sight. And after that, I finished up my round, and I just sat in my car the rest of the night in a well-lit area. I know that I saw a fully visible person. I know it. There were no tricks of light, no hallucination. It was plain as day. And this encounter seemed to break open just the proverbial dam, because after this, I had numerous unexplainable occurrences. And I want to share a few with you guys now. So normally, my then girlfriend, now my wife, would drop by around 8 p.m. and bring me dinner since I couldn't really leave. I never told her about my experiences because, well, I didn't want to freak her out. But as I'm walking her back to her car to leave, I see her reach back and touch her ponytail and then look around with a look on her face. I ask her what's wrong, and she says, "Nothing. I must have got my ponytail caught in a tree branch because I felt something." So I pointed out to her that the closest tree was 20 feet away and that was impossible. And then she gets really pale and says that it felt like someone ran their hand through her hair, front to back, and then pulled on the ponytail. We were both pretty freaked out by this, and she just left after that. And she never came and brought me dinner again after that, too. I was also originally hired because the cemetery had a period of time where they experienced some grave robbers and people breaking in to perform satanic rituals or something. I was 21 years old, doing this as a side job, mind you, with no gun and no weapons or anything like that. I was given a barcode scanner and was told to drive through the entire cemetery every hour or so to patrol and to scan each of the pre-posted barcodes to prove that I was actually doing it. Now, this cemetery was massive, pretty much broken into three parts. The newer part, the historic part, and the famous part where celebrities and other famous people are buried. I did this routine once and never did it again, going so far as to break the damn barcode scanner so I didn't have to do it. Because, while I was driving, it was pitch black, coming around a long curved road, and my headlights picked up what I could have sworn were a pair of legs just walking across the path, but only up to the knee. There were shoes, pants, and knees, then just absolutely nothing. I obviously stopped dead in the road and just watched these pair of legs with no body cross the road 10 feet in front of me. I put the car in reverse immediately, did what felt like the longest K-turn of my life, and just noped it straight back to the parking lot. A couple of strange other things have happened too, like hearing noises and seeing floating lights in the cemetery after I know for sure that everyone is gone. Weird animal sounds too that I couldn't recognize. Also, the guy who worked the day shift there, which was 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. I think, was a pretty grimy dude. His name was Bart, and part of our job was to go around the cemetery and check the graves for personal effects left by family members and whatnot, and remove them. Many people left things like toys for children who had passed away, birthday cards, mementos, all sorts of stuff. I personally hated this policy, and I actually refused to enforce it. I mean, who was I to take a dead child's toy fire engine and throw it away, right? But Bart had the habit of scouring the cemetery for things that he deemed valuable and would take them home instead of throwing them away or bringing them to the office to be picked up by the family. And in the short time that I worked there, Bart's mental state really deteriorated. He started spending hours there, even after his shift was over, walking around the cemetery and drinking heavily. He seemed detached and even more out of it than when I first met him. Eventually, when I didn't see him for a week or so, I asked about him, and my boss said that he just no-called and no-showed and never heard from him again. I often wondered if he developed some type of attachment from bringing so many objects home that he really shouldn't have. But once Bart stopped showing up, I picked up his Saturday morning shift. It was a quiet day, so I pulled my car around the back of the old chapel to take a nap. The chapel was surrounded by 12-foot-high hedges, so I figured it was a good spot to park for an hour and just shut my eyes. I fall asleep and I wake up to see my car completely surrounded by dead people. It was so real and so vivid and just so much detail. They were all pressed up against the glass in the windshield, and they had on the outfits that they were buried in. Suits, dresses, but all dirty and in different stages of decomposition. No one spoke and no one moved, and they all just kind of stared like I was some sort of zoo exhibit. And then I woke up. I'd been asleep, and it was obviously a dream, but the thing is that it just felt so real. I've never had a dream so real and so vivid before or even after that. So I took it as a message, and after that I called my boss and I quit as soon as I left at 4 p.m. These days, I go back to that cemetery from time to time because I actually have 3 grandparents and an aunt buried there. I never linger too long though, and I always make sure that I'm long gone before it gets dark. So I was raised in the suburb of Ramsey, New Jersey. I was around 10 or 11, so this probably happened around the summer of 2002, I think. Anyway, my aunt would go grocery shopping in the main ShopRite of town, but it was also in the same parking lot of this pretty big strip mall. The parking lot was always packed too, and it was a hot summer day this day, and I must have been out for school for summer because I distinctly remember spending the day at the pool with my aunt, which was right down the street from the ShopRite. She had to do some light grocery shopping, but of course, the parking lot was packed. So she parked all the way to the side of the shop, right, so it was all the way in the back of the strip mall, but pretty vacant. I asked if I could stay in the car, but she said that it'd be too hot, but I said that I'll just keep the windows rolled down, so she agreed and said that she'd only be a few minutes. Now, I can't remember if this van was already there when my aunt pulled into the spot or if it pulled in after, but I can only describe it as a dark-coloured van, similar to a typical mum car. And a man whose features, who have been totally wiped from my memory, opened up the sliding side door and just sat on the edge of the opening. I remember noticing him just kind of sitting there and smiling in my direction, and it made me a bit nervous. He was wearing normal summer clothes. Nothing about him was particularly frightening, but he was just sitting there, staring at me. I wonder if that's why his face is lost to me, because I tried not to look in his direction because it was just really awkward. Either way, he started to go phew and fan himself dramatically. It really seemed like he was trying to get my attention, but I just kept ignoring him. I had one of those cheap water toys where they were shaped like a mini Game Boy, and you would push a button and a ring or a shape would be pushed up, and you had to aim it into a little basket. And I was just playing that when, finally, he addressed me and said, "Oh, it's so hot out, I can't imagine how hot you must be." I awkwardly nodded, and he said, "Did you go swimming?" He obviously noticed that I was sitting on my beach towel, and all I had were my shorts above my one-piece swimsuit. I said yes, and awkwardly tried to focus on my toy. He leaned himself on our car, and the windows were almost all the way rolled down, and then he said, "I have air conditioning. Why don't you come and wait in my car? Are you waiting for your mum?" I said no thanks to this, but he kept insisting that it was hot in my car and I must be so miserable. It felt like forever that he was just trying to convince me to get out of the car, and he also kept asking me who I was waiting for. I kept saying that my aunt will be back, she just needed a few things, and eventually he must have gotten bored with me and shrugged and said, "I hope you don't overheat in there," and closed the passenger side door and just sat in the front seat. He turned the car on and sat there for a little bit more before he pulled away, and I remember feeling just so incredibly nervous and had that distinct anxious butterfly feel in my stomach. A second after he pulled away, I saw my aunt not far up with a lot of her groceries, and I told her that a man asked me if I wanted to sit in his car with the AC and wait for her, and he was really annoying. She was obviously like, "What? You're lying," and I insisted that it happened, but she just looked confused and said that I made it up in my head. To this day, she doesn't believe me too and thinks that the heat must have really gotten to me that day. I usually jokingly tell her that she's lucky she didn't get arrested for leaving a kid in the car on a hot summer day. I still don't understand why the man didn't try harder to physically take me out of the car. I don't know if I understood what he was trying to do back then, but as an adult, the memory's pretty chilling. But the windows were rolled down and he could have easily unlocked the doors. I wonder if it was the busy parking lot that literally saved me. If I had been forced out, I 100% could have caused a scene, and for sure someone would have at least noticed. But all I know is that some guy back in 2002 thought that he was smooth enough to convince a kid to jump in his minivan to enjoy his air conditioning. I'm just grateful that, for whatever reason, I decided to not get out of the car, and hopefully he was never successful with whatever his intentions were. So I'm a guy and 18 at the time, and I was planning on moving out of state for college and didn't want to pay the ridiculously high price for student housing, so me and my mum turned to Craigslist for better options. We found a lot of places near the school and for a reasonable price too, but the one that we did find would always live in infamy for me. So we found a place for $500 per month in an area near the school, so we instantly took it. On the day before my school's orientation, me and my parents drove down to the school and rented a hotel room for 2 nights. On the way down, I was texting the guy about the room, to which he gave a description as well as the address to where I would be going. Note that I was the one that was filtering through the options while my mum sent links for any new openings. After texting back and forth for quite some time, he asked for me to send a picture of myself, right after he sent a picture of himself. So I sent him one, but by examining his pic, I began to feel a bit uneasy about this whole thing, especially after he failed to respond to any of my texts after the pic was sent, even the one where I asked him what time would be good for me to come and check the place out. That night, I talked to my dad about it, and we decided to go to the address while my mum was asleep in the hotel. And it was then that my suspicions proved to be true, as we were greeted with a trashy-looking trailer home with a white pickup truck parked next to it. But thankfully, it was like 2 a.m, so he couldn't have seen us. But the next day, after orientation, me and my dad explained our findings to my mum, where we decided that my enrollment at the school would be pushed back to the fall semester. I was starting mid-quarter, until I could find a proper place to stay. So, from what I can guess, the guy thought that I was an 18-year-old female looking for a place to move and that I'd be checking out the place by myself. So, when it was revealed that I was a fully grown man, I'm 6'2" by the way, he must have realized that his plans to prey on a teenager weren't coming into fruition. No, I didn't catfish him, it was his own assumption, as in, I mentioned that I was male in my email, though the name Jay must have made him think that I was a girl. So, a little preface before I start this. I've always been on the sensitive side of the paranormal, ranging from just knowing something that I shouldn't have to seeing stuff. I don't usually talk about this kind of stuff since most people around me just kind of dismiss it as my imagination or the fact that I was just dreaming or something. Anyway, when I was in the Marine Corps, I was deployed to Afghanistan in October of 2011. I was on FOB, Forward Operating Base, Hanson for the first few months, and FOB Jackson for the last few months before getting moved to Camp Leatherneck for the last month-ish when our replacements showed up. My job was to operate the laundry service as well as provide clean water for the showers. Technically not clean enough to drink, but you could if you needed to, for US and Afghani troops. After the first month or so on Hanson, whenever I tried to sleep, I swear that I could feel a hand grabbing at my calf and slowly work its way up. I immediately dismissed it as just being a result from stress or sleep paralysis type thing, and it would kind of subside since it wasn't a very strong feeling at all. This happened for a night or two a week, but eventually stopped. Fast forwarding to when I was on Leatherneck, nothing happened when I was at Jackson or even my short trip to Nole, so I forgot about what happened. At this point, a lot of real-life stuff had happened, and I was having issues going to sleep, so I would play music in some earbuds, or I would re-watch a movie in my head, basically anything to get my mind off the day's events, and I slept in a room with 2 to 4 other people, so depending on who was there, I would try to be considerate, especially with the not ideal layout of the 6 or so bunk beds. Also, I need to mention, and it's an important detail, that there was an emergency exit sign above the door that glowed a soft orangey kind of red colour. So, one of the nights I was running something in my head, 100% awake, eyes closed though, no headphones, and I heard 2 people, male and female, talking. This is not something that I would have imagined at all, but I was curious since I could hear them quite clearly, and the conversation went something like this. So, someone says hi, and then another male says hello, and then someone says, "What are you guys up to?" And a female says, "We're just looking around." Another person says, "Where are you from?" "We work for so-and-so." And then, "You work for so-and-so?" And then the female says, "No, silly." And then I felt a slap on my sleeping bag. I immediately propped myself up on my elbow and looked down at my sleeping bag, and there's a physical handprint in the fabric. An old 3-part puffy sleeping system, and it was where I felt the slap, and it was at an angle that no one in the room could have gotten at. The other 2 were pressed out with headphones on the other side of the room, and there was no one else besides the 3 of us in there. At this point, I just noped the heck out of there for a smoke, and when I returned, I put in some headphones, and I just eventually went to sleep. 2 nights later, I had the worst dream to date, though. I hope it was a dream anyways. So, I woke up in my bed and noticed that the normal orange light was blue. There was a faint electrical buzz, and there was a figure standing in the light. It was a solid black figure, No discernible facial features, but it looked like a British boy from around the early 1900s, based on the outfit. But when I looked at it, I just felt the worst sense of fear and dread that I've ever felt, too. I mean, you could tell me that I had to go and drive over a landmine, and I wouldn't have felt like this. After a few seconds, though, I just kind of blacked out. And after that, nothing occurred for the rest of the time that I was there.